All right, introduction to CSS. Today we're going to go over some of these basic building blocks of CSS. We are going to go over CSS units, colors. We're going to talk about background colors and some of the attributes there. We talk about what borders are, how you may style some fonts, how you may style an image. We will touch on the fact that CSS operates under a box model, and we'll get more into that. CSS style sheets and how we may link to them. All right, so building on our last class that we did with the syntax and the selectors, now we're getting more into the properties themselves. So when we're talking about units in CSS, we just want to know that CSS has several different units for expressing length. Many properties take this length value, so we may have a width, a margin, padding, and font size. But when we're talking about these length values, we need to understand that these units, these lengths, can be followed by a number. So you would have a digit 10, px, 2em. So really have a value, and then you have to understand what the length unit is. So if you don't know context, px will be pixel. EM, I forget exactly the terminology there. We'll get into that. But you need to know the lengths and how they are interpreted by the different devices. We also use percentages. And you need to pick and choose when you use these units because some are very specific and can cause problems visually. Displaying something at 100 by 100 pixels may look differently on a, and we can look at the different devices like a desktop image compared to say a tablet, whereas maybe percentages might be a little bit of a better choice. Maybe you need that image to be 20% by 40%, and that's relevant relative to the device screen. So you want that responsiveness to happen when you're resizing. So a note is white space cannot appear between the number and the unit. So if you kind of notice here, it looks a little compressed here. You might want to give a little bit of a space for readability, but that's for your own eye. The browser itself will look for the value and then the corresponding unit. However, if the value is 0, the unit can be omitted. That's true. So you don't need to put 0 pixels anymore. Or 0 EM, if it's a 0, it'll know it's a 0. It'll respect that. For some CSS properties, negative lengths are allowed. Yeah, that's true. There are some negative lengths allowed. Right. There's also some other overflow reasons why you might want to use a negative value. There are two types of length units: relative and absolute, which we kind of touched on what those might be in an example. All right, so a big slide here. Numbers, lengths, percentages sound exactly like you may think they are. Numerical value types you might find yourself using in CSS. The following are all classes numeric. So we have an integer value. As you know, an integer value is a whole number, which is 1024 or negative 55. If you ever ask yourself, can you have a negative integer? If you don't remember, mathematics, yes, you can. A number can represent a decimal. It may not have a decimal with a fractional component. For example, again, 0.25, 128 minus 1.2. So confusing part, you may run into many style sheets where it may flip-flop between a whole number. It may flip-flop to a decimal number. It may flip to a percentage. Ideally there should be some consistency across the board, but you may find this used elsewhere, many places and many different style sheets. And you kind of have to give context to what each is. Dimension. The dimension is a number with a unit attached to it. For example, we have 45 DEG, 5S. Now DEG, I would have to maybe look up in the MDM what DEG is, right? Because I off the top of my head, if I were to look at that DEG, what is that? And I have to dig into that, right? And see what kind of marker unit that is. You know, what is DEG? Off the top of my head, I'd have to really look at it. But for sure, I know PX is pixel because I use that all the time. That's a very, very useful one. Percentage of one of those are the ones I use mostly. Somebody has an answer to that question. Sorry, I can't see that right now, but I'll get back to that. So dimension is an umbrella category used for length, angle, time, resolution types. Percentage represents a fraction of some other value, obviously. We know our fractions, for example, 50%. Percents always allow relative to another quantity. For example, the element's length is relative to its parent element length. You might wonder what that means, but when you get into the box model, you'll understand what that means. Question was, DEG equals degree. Thank you very much, Tasha. That's what it was. See? All right. So again, when we're talking about relativity, we're talking about relative to the parent object. Absolute is different, though. When we're dealing with absolutes, you know, we're being very specific. We're having a very fixed value. So when we say 1.5 centimeters, we mean 1.5 centimeters. It's not going to change. It can, and that can cause a problem on multiple devices, right? When we're switching. Let's take a look at that. Why not? Go to my favorite site right now because, well, because I'm employed there, so I'll say it's my favorite site. So if we quickly look at this, right, when we're talking about this image here, if this was measured at, you know, 500 pixels by 600 high or 500 by 400, whatever that is, you can imagine if we went to the mobile view that would take up the entire screen. But if we were probably going to inspect that with our dev tools, you can already see now that image is changing, right? It's changing dimensions based on the viewport. So right now, it's much smaller. If I were to actually look at that image itself, I imagine it would be percentage. I would hope it would be percentages. And you can tell in here, we have some percentages in there, and we have some absolute values in there. So if we kind of played with this image here, and if we said that this width here would be 50%, what would happen there? So now it's 0. So now there is no image anymore because it has no width, if you notice. If I put 10%, it's all tiled there. Look at that. If I play with it again, 5%, you see all the images now are 50% of their parent element. So now this is much smaller than what we want. If we were to say it would be 50 pixels, again, we have a different behavior here. It's only 50 pixels big. But really what we want is probably percentages in this scenario, right? So this was back to 100. If we did 200%, well, I think there's some cascading value there that prevents it from overflowing. So if I go 100%, let's go back to 100%. And that's kind of where it's at. Question. Yes, go ahead, please.
Hi, Mike. So this percentage part, this is actually with respect to the amount of screen size on a particular device, or is it the percentage of the actual image dimensions?
Yeah, so I'm kind of jumping ahead a little bit. I mentioned to you something called the box model, and we're going to talk about it later on, but really this is respect to its parent element. So if this parent element was a div right here, if you can see this div container, if you can see in my highlight here, when I highlight it, it'll actually say that the div container is 402 times 248. So when we say max width of the image to be 100%, it means 100% of the container that it lives in. So if there is a div that is marked at that, whatever height width it has, the image will take up 100% of that. So not 100% of the entire screen, but 100% of its most parent element. Now,
Thank you.
yes, now this image could just be sitting in a body tag, and the body of the site would be the entire screen. At that point in time, then it would fill the entire width of this entire page up. So that's kind of what that is, and we're referring to the box model that we're going to get to. I could have put it at the front of the class, but I knew we'd be talking about it a lot, so we'll recap with that when we get there. Well, that kind of gives a little bit of context to units. Let's quickly look at an example. Again, W3 Schools has a lot of good exercises too you could look at if you wanted to. This is showing some absolute absolute values. So we have a header tag, and this header tag is this HTML element here. And we have it with a style, H1, that has a font size at 1.5 pixels, centimeters. So it's absolute, 1.1 centimeters. The next one we have H2, we have 1 centimeter. And then we have a paragraph that has 0.5 centimeter. And we have another property here for line height. So you can see this kind of thing going on. If we were to go through and say, would we be able to do pixels? Let's see, 1.5 pixels. Then you can see that it doesn't even register there. Look how it's a small little tiny piece of text. You can't see it. I'll put it to 10.5 pixels. So you can see it's much smaller. So these are absolute values here that are different than relative values, which would be relative to the screen itself. So if I did a percentage and I ran that, it would say it's relative to that this header tag that has some style to it. If I said 105%, let's see what happens there. See, it kind of takes this H1 container size itself and does that. If I did something like this, paragraph, some text, paragraph, close paragraph, and I said that this would be font size is 100%. 100%, let's run it. So now if we said that this would be a height of 100 pixels. Oh, it crashed it somewhat. So it's gotten a little bit smaller there, 100% of 100 pixels. So it's relative to the box. And you can't really see it unless you add a border to it. And when you add a border to it, it'll be a box in itself. Everything in CSS is a box. So if you can imagine, each element here has a box around it. And it's relative to these boxes, the sizing. See this, the size of that, the size of that. If you were to highlight, it's relative to that rectangle's height and width. So these are absolute lengths. Absolute lengths, again, they're fixed. And a length expressed in any of these will appear as that exact size. Absolute length units are not recommended for use on screen because the screens vary so much. In old school CSS1 and HTML, we didn't care about devices because we only had one device, and that was a desktop. There was no other reason to make anything else look good. So I remember we hard-coded pixels everywhere because that's just, we didn't even think that there would be something like a phone that had a small viewport. And when I say viewport, I mean the screen of the device, the port in which it is viewed. We didn't have to worry about that, but now we have so many different types of devices. Absolute lengths are bad practice unless there's something very specific that you need to do that needs to be a certain width and height. Relative is the way to go. However, this is the point that you might want to use it. If the output medium is known as print, if you're printing something out, then you would want to keep it absolute because you're basically, that's your only output medium. So just a quick highlight of all the different all the different units for absolute lengths. You know, these are all the ones that you may need to look at. Pixels are relative to the viewing device. So however big that pixel is on that Samsung Galaxy phone it may be different to your Windows 10 laptop like I'm using right here. I need to upgrade. For low DPI devices, 1 pixel is 1 device pixel dot on the screen. You can imagine how small those pixel dots are. For printers and high resolutions, 1 pixel implies multiple device pixels. So, you know, we're dealing with all these different kind of interpretations here, but pretty straightforward. Centimeters are what they sound like, 1 cm. This is equivalent to the pixels if you really wanted to know. But the main thing we're after, and you may need to know this in some design project, but for now, obviously centimeters, millimeters, quarter meters, inches, pixels, points, you get my drift. You'll see PT and PX used a lot. Can't say I've really seen many more of these used in web experiences, but just know them. We've already talked about relative lengths. So relative lengths specify the length relative to another length property. These units scale between different rendering mediums. As we said, 1 pixel on a phone is different than 1 pixel on a printer. 1 pixel on a desktop is different than 1 pixel on a tablet. So the benefit, as we already established, is using these relative units is that with some careful planning, you can make it so the text or other elements scales relative to everything else on the page. So here we can see we have our selector here, which is a P for all paragraphs. Inside of our selector for all paragraph elements, we have font dash size equal to 16 pixels. So that's saying that every content in the paragraph will have a font size of 16. It will also have a line height of 2 EM. So line height will be how big that line will be, that box. Again, a selector for a div. Across all the divs, all the content will have a font size, font dash size. And you got to remember we have this colon, space, 30px with a semicolon here. If you remember, there's no space in between here in any of the syntax here. And we need to nicely tie this, finish this style line with a semicolon. This div has a border. So this is a little different. We haven't talked about borders, but it's saying it's going to have a 1 pixel border that's solid and black. And you can notice that there you're allowed to have spaces in between those different attributes of that border style. Span selector, and that's saying all the content in a span has a font size of 0.em. To be honest, I use PX pixels pretty much every time. I don't really go through and mix and match like this, but you know, if you see it in some style sheets, know that it's there. All right, so if we were to try some of this, this is an example on EM. Try it out. All right, so you can see here what we just went through with the P, the div, and the span. This is how it's represented. We have a div. We have a couple paragraphs here that are 16 pixels. The calculated height. These paragraphs have a calculated line height of 2 times 16 equals 32 pixels. So it has a line height. And then we said this div has a border. So this is this border here that we're talking about here. This is the border around this element. So when we reference the box model, you can kind of see it when you throw borders on everything. If we add a border to all of these elements, you're going to see that all these elements in behind the scene have an invisible border. And if you actually run this, you'll see that our page actually kind of looks like a box. It has a parent box, and then each element has its own box around it. Normally, you don't see it to the visual eye, but if we were to put borders on everything, you would kind of get the idea that there's boxes within boxes within boxes, right? And that's called the box model in a very high level. So that was EMs. And we have some other unit here, just to give context to what we're talking about here. All right, so we basically are saying right out of the box, it's really, we're using another one here, VW. We're saying this font size is 20 VW, and we're resizing this entire H1 that high. So VW is viewport width. The viewport is the device's window, the browser window. The resize the width of the browser window to see how this font size of H1 changes. So if we were to do a resize, you can see it changed, which is really great. If we maximize it, it gets bigger, right? That's called responsiveness. One note here is it says 1 VW equals 1% of the view width, and a VW unit is not supported by IE or earlier. So again, we're talking about legacy browsers when we're talking about IE8. So if you put this style in IE8, it may ignore it completely. It may not throw errors, but may ignore it completely, and be aware of that. I could have IE fired up, to be honest. I'm a little scared to show via IE because it crashes a lot, and I could end up crashing this whole session. So just know it's much older technology. All right, I think you guys get what lengths are, but it's good to know. So here's some more units. We already talked about them. EM, we already talked about font size of the parent, in which typographic properties such as font size and font size of other element itself, others in width. EX, there's CH, I can't say, you can read the definition here. RM is the font size of the root element, versus the font size of the element itself. These can get confusing, to be honest. Just so you know, I'm not going to ever ask you to tell me the difference between, give me the X height of the element's font. Tell me which one that is. Yeah, unless it's something very straightforward, like, VW, what is VW in respect to the viewport width? Yeah, I mean, some of these are so obscure, I would not expect anybody to memorize this slide, put it that way. Just know what they are. Say if somebody says, what are some relative lengths, you could give a couple of them. So hold me to my word on that, somebody out there. VW, 1% of the viewport width, VH, the height, Vmin and Vmax. You're going to see max width and max height a lot. I'll leave you to go over the definitions of these slides here. But here's a length example here. Right, so we have, again, our box model here. So we're basically have a wrapper. So now we're getting into classes again. And basically what a class is it's a selector that has a dot in front of it, and it's a way of sharing styles across many elements and many pages, as we established last lecture. So this is a wrapper, and it's going to say everything inside of this element is going to have a font size of 1 EM. And then we said there's going to be another class called PX, and we put it on here, and we're going to say it has a width of 20 pixels. So this box right here, I am a 20 pixel width, corresponds to this one here, this box. If you notice, you can apply multiple classes to an object by space. Now there's a box class on there that may just be used as a way to select it when you get into higher levels of CSS. But right now, you can notice that there's no definition of box there. You can actually do that. You can give a class that has no style to it as a means of selecting all the boxes on your screen. You could do that. And sometimes I do that as well. So we have a pixel, we have a view width, a viewport width, and we have an EM, and they're basically saying that based on this styles here, there's going to be applied different widths here. So you can see I am 200, I am 10 viewport width, and I am 10 EM. So we have this kind of situation going here. And if you notice, we kind of showed the border just to demonstrate this, but really that would be invisible to you. No slides on that one. Great. Colors. So yes, go ahead. Please.
Mike, could you please explain the significance of box again? Because it kind of went over me.
I'm referring to it in a way. I wanted to cover it at the end, but we can also look at it now. So let's see in here. Properties. I forget exactly in the console, you can look at the box itself. Where is it here? It's somewhere. There it is. Okay. There it is right here. Our box model is built into our Chrome browser. So you can see that every element, if you highlight on the screen, will have this kind of box model to it. It'll be the element itself. If you can see, I'm highlighting over it. I was going to show you guys this at the end. But if you see, I'm highlighting over it, and it's highlighting this image on the right here. So it's saying that this is 400 by 250, but there's also a padding around it, and the padding is 0. There's also a margin around it. The margin is also 0. And then there's the container element here that it lives in. So it is saying that there's all these different boxes around it that have attributes, but really the box model itself is the image and then the container it lives in. So I don't know if that confused you anymore, but if it lives in a parent tag that is a picture, and the picture, this picture has a certain height and width, when you go to the element and you say, I want it to be 100% of the height and width, therefore it should fill up the entire container itself. If you were to say I wanted to do 25% of it, it would only take up 25% of the container. So if it's confusing, don't worry, we'll go over it at the end, again at the end. But the point to take away is that everything in CSS is a box. All right, so moving on, colors. Again, I can go over every single color for you, but we already kind of got the hint that there's colors at play in our styles. But again, they have specific units themselves, specific names. We can name them as we would understand them: orange, slate blue, light gray. Otherwise, we can get into the hex values or the RGB values, and then it's a color code. And you can do that. If you are very interested in colors, there's 140 different names you can look at in that link there. Yeah, and just saying that we can specify them by those color names here, as we did here. You could create a box and fill it with a background of any one of these colors. This is what a hex value looks like, and some of the different ways of in this case, I guess this is tomato red, I guess. This is different ways of representing what that would be. So in CSS, colors can be specified using the RGB values, the hex values, HSL values, and all these, and there's a whole bunch of other ones there, RGBA, HSLA, not really sure what all those terminologies are, but they are all the same as the name tomato. So let's try some of those out here. So if we were to try some of these out, we will take a look at them. All right, so we have some different ways of displaying some of this information here. If you look at, they all have a background color. Then they have different ways, different contexts of showing these things. If we were to change this hex, because I'm most familiar with the hex, if we were to change this to all 0, 0, what would happen there if we run it? It didn't do much. I know though, if we do this, 1, 2, 3, 4, that should change it. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm changing the text. It's been a long day of coding. Yes, there we go. Now this should change to black, right? Because it has no value. If you were ever looking to understand where to do this, you could do hex value color picker. Surely you may have seen this, maybe you haven't. Some threat values from this site, that's always not a good sign. So this is basically showing us that we have different ways of using these colors here. So if we select green, it's going to give you all of the different hex values. It's also going to give you these things here, RGB, HSLE. You may need these from different reasons of design. However, for my purposes, I always use this hex values here. I rarely use these kind of different things. And then we can get into different hues, and it gives a context of what you may need. So, you know, if you're styling and this is your thing and you're a designer, I'm sure you would definitely know these color schemes very, very well. I don't do that much styling, so I really don't use those that much. All right. So we want to get into at least to borders before taking a break. So let's keep going. Push through. So those are color values. And then you can also add transparency onto that. So this is 50% transparency on the same colors we looked at. If we take a look at transparency and see how they accomplish transparency, I imagine there is another property on there. So let's take a look. All right, so we have, this is color values here. So 50% transparency, but 50%. So we are just changing some of these values here, kind of give it the bleaker look. So we have the top number here is 25591, and then we've kind of added this little 0.5 in there for transparency. And then I'm sure as we really lessen that, we can get something that's almost close to being very transparent. So there's really different ways to kind of play with colors and visual elements, if that's your thing. If it's not, then just know about it. So colors, there's a little bit more than what we thought it would be, but you can also set them on text and borders. So as we have here, excuse me, you know, we have a bunch of text here. Black and white's kind of boring. However, if we apply a bunch of colors to it, you know, maybe it stands out in a different way. This right here is really hard to read. I really wouldn't want to read a page like that, but just know that you can really change the colors as well for text, not only for backgrounds and other elements as well. Border colors are what they sound like. We can control and set the color of border elements. So any element we already established, like a paragraph or a div, will have a container border or a box around it, which usually is not visible to the eye. But if you do put a style on it with the attribute border, you determine the size of it. So in this case, it's border 2 pixels. You want to say it's solid, and then obviously your color, and then the content within it. And that'll give you this border effect around each one of these different ones here. And let's try that one out. If you ever grab my notes there in the speaker area, there should be, I hope when you can, I hope when you download these that you can actually see the speaker notes. If not, message me. I can give all these different lecture examples in another way. All right, so we have this context here. So if we were to go ahead and say, okay, I want this to be 20 pixels long and run that, now we have a big border here. And if we want to change this to black, we can also change this to black as well. Getting into borders, there we go. So we can, so maybe we want to say that this border here is going to be, instead of pixels, we're going to say it's 25%. Make it relative a bit. Now it goes away because it's relative to its container, so it's very small. What happens here? Maybe border, see, it doesn't like that for the border. So let's see, 25 pixels, back to 25. And now it likes that as well. If we put this to 2000, what would happen? Now it would fill the entire screen up because that's a huge border. I don't even know where the content is lost, really. I don't even know where the content is. It's lost. probably in the middle somewhere. I think it overflowed everything. We lost everything. So that's that context there for borders. All right. Backgrounds, we already figured out what backgrounds were and how to change them. We use this background dash color quite often. You'll probably use this for your pages. That defines the background color of any element. We're only showing here ways of doing colors, but there's some really cool stuff you can do. You can set the background of your page to an image. You can tile images. You can do all sorts of fancy effects when you get good CSS. Like we're only talking about very building blocks of CSS, but there's some really nice visual stuff that you can really do here. You know, you can really make some very nice interfaces with this. All right, so the property accepts any color. So what we're referencing is we have background, this attribute here. We have a selector for a box, and it will be this selector here, this class. So it says this class is this attribute here. So we're going to have that selector across it, and we're going to apply to every element that has this class box. We're going to give it a background color, background dash color, colon, and then we're going to give it a hex value. And that hex value is going to fill this entire this box here with that purple color. And then we have a couple other HTML elements inside, nested inside. We have an H2, we have a paragraph, and we want to highlight, we just want to target the H2, which is background colors, and we want to change it to black, have a black background with a white foreground. So the way to do foreground is color, but you don't need to put foreground. And it'll change it to this kind of text. Now, one interesting thing to notice in here is we're ignoring the paragraph completely. We're ignoring it completely, but we want to target this nested span tag, and we want to give this effect to it here. So we're basically targeting that span tag. In fact, all span tags, and we're giving it a background color, but we're doing it a different way. We're using this RGB, this color, and then we're giving it a transparency of 50%, and then it gives that effect there. So if we were to look at that again as well, in an example, we'll take a look, and we'll go 5 more minutes, and then we'll. So this is let's see, this is a background in effect here. So this is basically across all the body. So the entire page has this. But what happens if we wanted to say, okay, I want my paragraphs to have a different background color, and hope that the cascade works. So if we want to give it a background color, dash color. Now remember, if you did background underscore color or background space color or background, you know, what have you, you need dash color, right, in order for it to work. So we want this to be red, and we want the color to be white. Let's take a run at that. So the cascade won because it's closer to this element itself. So it kind of overwrote this body tag. It overwrote that. If we did our developer tools and quickly looked at this, why not? Let's see what this looks like though. In this window here, we have this paragraph, and we can see here that on it, it has a P, and the P selector is background color of red, color is white. It overwrote the browser agent, which the browser agent we talked about was the style that it uses, and it's very bland, it's blocky, and it has this margin around it. But if you notice, it overwrote, it's very specific. But if we remove this color here, it's going to go back to the parent element, which is light blue. If we remove the color itself, I'm looking at this selection here, it's going to go back to black text, because that's what the default is. If, in fact, in the body itself, we said, okay, we want the color to be blue, for instance, and we run that, you'll see that it was not affected. However, if we go back to that element there, which is the paragraph, then remove this, it'll take the parent blue color and toggle that. So again, our cascading as we go down to being specificity, it gets very specific in the rankings, right, on the element itself. However, if we said something like this, right on the element itself inline, this is a way of overwriting it all. We could say color is purple. Now this is going to ignore this one because this is in our rankings. This is very specific now. So we're saying like this is purple now. Like this is saying it's gonna ignore this definition here on this element. If we had another element here that was a paragraph that said another paragraph, the expectation is it would not be purple, but it would be white. So if you notice that, this right here has no inline element, so therefore must roll up to this style here. So if you're confused, this happens all the time. This goes back to the ranking, and you gotta, sometimes you need to inspect it and say, why did this one lose? Why is this color here? Why is this not purple? What happened? What happened? And you need to kind of inspect the element itself and see why is the case. And we may come to the point that and realize that, okay, there's an online styling there that doesn't need to be there. For my pages to be consistent, I removed it, and now we have consistency across our paragraphs. All right, so that is background colors. Let's just finish off background colors at least. Background colors. We already did the screen. All right, so background images. So another thing to remember, it's kind of a neat thing, is that we can also have not only colors, we can have images. We can make some nice backgrounds, as we said. The background image property enables display of an image in the background of an element. So in this example, we have two boxes. One has a background image which is larger than the box. The other one has a small image of a star. And you can see there that we have a wrapper, and we have two divs, box A and box B. And box A has an attribute called background-image, but it has a URL here. And this is a relative file, but you could do the full absolute path, which might be www.google.com/images/star. or balloons.jpg. That's probably better for our single page tests. Anyhow, it'll basically grab that box, that container, and fill the background with the image, which can get really cool if you really start playing around with images and whatnot. All right,
Mike,
so yes.
I guess the dot A and the dot B go up in the header, and the div stuff goes down in the body, right?
Yes. So
okay.
Yes. So that would be. So I don't have. Yes, correct. You would have that referenced inside of the head, inside of a style tag. And as we're getting better, we're gonna find this style tag growing extremely long, and we're gonna. And there's going to be we're going to have to do some housekeeping with our styles, and we're going to have to eventually move some of this to an external file, but we're not there yet. But yes, in those examples, if you see a snippet like that, know it's either in a style sheet or it's in a style tag, either in the header or in the body, but it needs to be wrapped within a style tag. It's not going to work. It's not going to work if it's just sitting there floating like this. If I remove this style tag and I run this, this is gonna happen to you. It's just gonna be translated as text. It needs to be somewhere inside of a style tag. Ideally, in the header, so the browser knows how to render properly. All right, so I've talked I've gone over my 45 blocks, so let's, probably because I did some admin in the beginning, but let's take a stretch a little bit. I have the lab here. Give me a minute or so, a couple minutes after I get up to upload this, but it's going to look like full stack lab 5 fundamentals. So what I would say to this is I'll either put the link to the starter code, or you guys can navigate. I'll put this up first and then I'll have to update it. I can put a link to the code itself. Really what I do is I have that GitHub repository, as you may know. If you go to the lab itself, you'll see lab. I'll put a section for lab 5, and then you would find lab 5, and then you would click the example there. Momentarily, I have to use my Git to upload it. I didn't do that before the class, but then once you dig into that, you'll have the starter code to get going. And then it's basically using some styling and selectors and just working our way through at least exercise 1, and that's on units. Exercise 2 is on units and lengths as well, absolute lengths and absolute lengths and relative lengths. And then some background colors like we talked about already. So those 3 exercises, if you want to kind of get context and start getting into this code, I'll give you a little bit of lab time. So let's say that we will take about a half hour. Okay, we'll take a half hour. We'll be back at 7:45, and we'll continue on. And then we'll continue on with the lecture. Okay. All right. Thank you, guys.